Avast ye Blender enjoyers! In this video, I'm going to be showing off a few easy mistakes and settings that can waste time trying to fix or revert. And hopefully I can save you from what I did, which was spend a few hours looking through forum posts and videos trying to track down that one button to fix my scene. Alright, so I'm in my new scene, and what I'm going to start with is showing off how normals can kind of get messed up when you're working on some objects, especially if you start from a plane and you model from there. It can be really easy to kind of get these normals messed up. So what you're gonna do is just to see if the normals are as they should be. You can go up to this menu. You can click on Face Orientation, and that'll show you all the orientations of individual faces. And so if it's blue, it means that this face is correct. This is the front side of that face. And if it's red, so let me go in and select these faces. I'm going to go to Normals, Flip. You can see that the faces are now facing in the wrong direction, and so they will be red. And this just means that essentially you have this back side of the face pointing outwards. And while this isn't a problem if they're all facing the same direction, so all these faces are backwards, and if I go to flip, they're all forwards now. If you start mixing and matching, so if I say take this one face and flip it, you can start to have weird ways that modifiers and shading gets applied. So I can also shade smooth. And you can see it's just not acting in the way that it normally would, which can be a problem. So what you want to do is you want to, just to make sure that these faces are facing the right direction, and you don't really even need to have face orientation on. You can select all your faces in edit mode, go to mesh, go to normals, and recalculate outside. You can also click shift in. I think that shortcut popped up there. And that's just going to make sure that all of your faces are pointing in the right direction. They're all going to be pointing outwards. And sometimes this can get a little messed up, and you might need to go in and just manually, click this, go to normals, flip, and just flip it in the right direction. But for the most part, normals recalculate outside. It works pretty well, and it'll do the job in most cases. The next thing that can happen is you can accidentally go to a circle select. And so this is really easy to click into. You just W on your keyboard while in object mode. And it can make it very difficult to select what you want to select. So right here, I'm going to go ahead and turn off our face orientation. You can see that it is currently on the select circle. And it's very easy to kind of not notice that your selection tool has changed. And it can be pretty difficult to change it back if you don't know this menu is here. So you can see it's not acting quite in the same way that the normal select box does, which is just this, and then being able to shift click. It can be a little irritating. So if you want to ever go back to the normal select box, what you're going to do is come over here, you're going to click and hold, and that should bring up this little menu, and the default is just select box. The next thing that can cause issues, and I'm going to remove this subdivision, and I'm going to shade flat, and I'm just going to go back to my select box, is if your scaling is wrong. So right over here, you can see the scale of this cube currently is just 1, 1, 1, so it's scaled 1 on that Z direction. It's scaled 1 on that Y direction, and scaled 1 on the X direction. But if I start scaling it, so now it's 2 to whatever on all of these, because I scaled it in every direction, and then I'm going to scale it along the Y direction, you can see that the scale starts to change. That value is no longer 1. And while this isn't necessarily a problem if you're just working from basic shapes, if you start modeling, it can get a little bit problematic, because if I go in here, and I'll go ahead and select some edges, if you start beveling or doing some modeling features, you can see that these bevels act in a little bit of an unusual way. So right here, this edge is pretty much a 45, 45, 90 triangle. It's going to be pretty equal on all sides. Whereas over here, very clearly, there is something going on that makes this edge just a little bit steeper and maybe not something that you want. So if this does happen, I'm going to reset that. What you can do is just Control A. It's going to bring up this apply menu, and you can apply scale. You can see, let's set those values back to 1. And then it should, if I go to bevel, make it so that all of these edges are beveling in the correct way, which is just in the equal kind of, 45, 45, 90 triangle. The next thing that can happen when you're modeling is that sometimes you can accidentally, maybe if I'm extruding some stuff, you might accidentally extrude something and then click escape to stop extruding that, and then suddenly you have what is 2 vertices in the same area. And this might not be obvious all the time. For example, if you're modeling some more complex shapes, like you're, doing something like this, and you have vertices all over the place, it might not always be clear. But the thing to do is, maybe if you have a subdivision, you can see that some of these edges aren't acting in the way that the other edges are. So right here on top, you can see that this curve is pretty sharp, and actually I can turn this up. It's a pretty much it's a very sharp angle. Whereas down here, it's a more rounded surface, and that's because up here you have extra geometry in the way that is making that subdivision round the area a little bit closer to that perfect 90 degrees. Unbeveled area. And so what you can do if this ever occurs, or you suspect it has occurred, is you're just going to take your mesh. You can select all. I'm going to click A to do that. You can go over here and you can click merge and then by distance, and that should remove all the vertices that are kind of occupying the same space. You can also click M on your keyboard, and that'll bring up the same menu and merge by distance. There you go. You can also, if you maybe just want individual vertices merged that are a little further apart, you can click on them individually and then merge by these other options. So I can merge at center, for example, and that'll merge at the center of those 2 vertices. And you can also set some limits on that merge by distance by clicking on this little menu down here. So let's just say that some vertices were a little further apart and I wanted to connect them. I can just turn this up until the vertices I want start connecting. There we go. And that should just work out pretty well. All right, I'm going to delete this object and put in a new cube that we can look at, center the camera. All right, and the next thing that can kind of go wrong when you're modeling is with the mirror modifier. So if I ever have an object and I'm just going to mirror across the y-axis, a lot of the times what you're going to be doing is you're just going to be moving this object over and then, maybe taking this one face and connecting it. Maybe you turn on clipping so that those vertices are together. You can see they're connected now. I can't move this apart even if I'm moving it along the y-axis. But if I go to the subdivision, you can see it's acting a little bit more like a barrel rather than a perfect sphere. And that's actually because there is, if I go into the X-ray mode, which is up here, Alt-Z on the keyboard, you can see that there's actually another face inside this mesh. And that's just because when you are connecting these mirrors together, it's not deleting this internal face. And so what you need to do is you just need to go in here, select this face, click delete, and that should get rid of that face and fix any issues that you're having. And it doesn't really look like that was causing too much of an issue there, but there are scenarios in which it very much can be problematic. All right, I'm going to go ahead and delete this mirror modifier and the subdivision modifier, and maybe I'll just delete this cube, in fact. and add in a new one. Okay, the next problem that you might run into is, I'm just going to go down here so that I have my cursor, and maybe I'm moving my cursor around, so I'm placing in a new object over here, circle. Maybe I want to delete that, put in a new object here. It's going to be a cylinder, and then it's over here, and for whatever reason, my 3D cursor comes over here and I want to reset it. So what you can do is I'm going to click Shift S, and it's going to bring up this little menu, and you can read through each of these. So they're all going to do different things, but the one that I want is I want cursor to world origin. And that's just going to reset that cursor to that intersection of your X, Y, and Z axis. So now if I go in and try to spawn in a new cylinder, you can see it's just going to be centered on that world origin. Another thing that can happen is if you are trying to set the origin of these shapes of your objects, you can sometimes use that select cursor to whatever to help you set that origin. So for example, if I want my origin to be up here at the center of this face, I can go to Shift S, cursor to selected, and that'll bring my cursor just right where I want it. And then I can tab out, so I'm back in object mode, set origin, origin to 3D cursor. And you can see that that has put my origin right there, so I can rotate my object around that new origin, and it should work out just fine. All right, delete this and then reset that origin. So cursor to world origin, there we go. All right, and now while we're on the topic of the origin or the 3D cursor, let's go into the bounding box center 3D cursor, this menu up here. And what this is it's going to determine how your object scales. So by default, your cube is going to scale just along the center of whatever points you've selected. So you can see right now it's scaling along that center of the cube. If I select just these top vertices, it's going to scale by the center of that face. And if I select a combination of those vertices, it's going to scale by some arbitrary point in the middle, depending on where my vertices actually are in space. But if I go up here and I accidentally click on one of these, what can happen is if I start scaling, let's see, active element, it will start scaling in a way that is not really what I want. So, if I just wanted to scale this cube normally, and I just wanted it to kind of shrink centered around this origin, now it's shrinking centered around a moving point, but really it's shrinking towards this one vertice that I selected last. And so if you ever are scaling an object, or maybe you're rotating an object or moving an object and it's doing something weird, what you can do is just go up here and make sure that this menu is on bounding box center. That will scale towards the center, or it's on the median point, which is, I believe, the default. All right, I'm going to go ahead and delete this cube and just spawn in a new one. So the next thing that can happen is sometimes when you are messing with your workspace, so let's say I want to bring this up, I want to, get rid of this and maybe bring this back down, and it can be very easy to kind of mess something up where you can be like, well, how do I go back, and how do I get that workspace back to where I wanted it, rather than, this very convoluted mess that I have here, where I have a sculpt mode and an object mode, and then what is this? Just the regular outliner. Yeah. So this is pretty messed up right now, and I don't really want to spend the time to go in and actually, look through all these little menus and find what it should be by the default, layout. So what I'm going to do is go up to Edit, or actually File, Defaults, Load Factory Settings, and then click OK. And what that's going to do is just reset this particular layout to what it would be originally. Another issue you might run into is the undo limit. So say I'm working on an object. I'm just going to select this top. I'm going to extrude out. I'm going to work on just kind of, moving stuff around, doing what I want to. Maybe rotate that, extrude that. And if I start undoing, eventually I am going to run out of undos. And it looks like I had enough to last me all the way to where I wanted to be this time. But if I keep going back, eventually I will run out of undos and I will be stuck at whatever halfway step I was at between where I wanted to be and where I, ended up after a failed modeling attempt. So what you can do to fix this is go to Edit, Preferences. That's going to bring up this menu, and then you're just going to go to System. You're going to go down to Memory and Limits, and you can just up this undo steps to whatever you want. Just keep in mind that the higher this undo step, the more RAM it's going to use. So the more memory that you're going to be using, just keeping track of your previous steps that you've done. All right. The last thing that can happen if you are in a scene and maybe you've rotated an object is suddenly when you go to scale that object, it is no longer scaling in the way that you wanted. So say that I wanted this to kind of scale along what was the z-axis, so make it more of a rectangular prism. When I go to scale along the z-axis, all it's really doing is scaling along what was the x and y axis. And so what you can do instead is when you go to scale, hit Z, and then Z again to scale that object along the local z-axis rather than the global z-axis, which is going to look like this. So again, hit that Z twice and it's going to scale along that local z-axis, which is going to be influenced by the rotation of that cube. And if I go in and actually reset that rotation, you can see rotation is 0. If I now try to scale along the z-axis in the local direction, it's going to be the exact same as the z-axis in the global direction. And so it's just something to keep in mind when you are resetting the rotation of an object, or rather applying that rotation. All right, and that's it. Thanks for watching.